video because I'm worried that that may have been what overloaded my own system. And since I'm doing this from my phone now, I thankfully have been listening to the last however long of testimony, and I heard Ellen's bill walkthrough as well as all of Jen's testimony. And so to save some time, because I don't know how much time we have, I will say my testimony could be to ditto what you just heard from Jen Holler. I want to reiterate what she just said, that VHFA definitely supports priority housing projects, PHPs. They're an important tool to create mixed income housing. There is a tweak to that definition that needs to be made. And I testified on that last Wednesday, and I submitted a memo with some language that I do hope the committee will consider. But I know that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we have this new language but since this language you're considering today builds off of the PHP definition, I just wanted to yet again call out the need to make that change. And I want to say, if anyone on the committee wanted to pull up that memo that I wrote on February 16th, you'll find a link to an affordability chart that speaks to one of the questions I heard a while ago. Maybe, I think it was Senator Westman, ask about like what price points and income levels are we really talking about here? Like, let's turn all these percentages into dollars. And that link is in my memo if you want to see this. Okay. I also think that Jen raised a critical point, and I want to underscore that there really is a huge difference between regulatory relief and funding priorities. And I think she went through a lot of the rules and regulations, the probably thousands of pages of documents that govern the funding priorities and funding requirements of ARPA funded housing. Because as she said, I want to make sure the committee understands that there's probably very few projects that only have ARPA funds. What is more common is for projects to have 6, 7 sources of funds, of which one is ARPA. So it's not just the ARPA rules that come into play, but it's all of the tax credit statutes and HUD funding and rural development funding maybe, and ARPA, which is a treasury program, and state rules if they get state funds through VHCB. And so but that's just another thing to remember, because I'm struggling. I mean, I'm looking at the purpose on page 6 of this accelerated program. And I'm curious if the committee has heard testimony from builders or developers who have said that they need this. And I'm trying to imagine what projects would qualify for what's been laid out here, but would not qualify for a PHP where they already get regulatory relief. And so I didn't know if there were any examples that the committee has, so I could almost kind of focus my comments on that.
Sure. Well, thanks. I think basically what we heard was that the previous legislatures had already provided regulatory relief, not financial relief or support, in the form of an Act 250 exemption that didn't save some time, although we had testimony that also suggested not very much time. And that I think your earlier testimony was it took something like $33,000 worth of fees out of the project. So, and the bottom line was to be sort of crude about it. It's like, you're not putting much money in. So that's why the affordability components are somewhat modest, 80% at market rate, and the covenant for longevity had been cut from 30 to 15 years. Like, you're sort of getting what you paid for. So we said, okay, could we pay more for something better? and better being that it would be moderate, or the missing middle plus lower income Vermonters, and that they were receiving a larger portion. So it wasn't just about regulatory relief anymore, but we were actually the concept was bringing more money to the table in the form of ARPA funds. But we don't know if that's, if we're approaching even sort of a attractive enough offer that we would see developers drawn to it. But that was the thinking behind the current conversation. And then also the administration had some ARPA funded project regulatory relief, as in the NRB drafted something that we looked at. So that's what's cooking here. And, so I'll pause there. That's why we're having it. It didn't originate with the developer community saying, we'd like to build more housing at higher levels of affordability with longer covenants.
Yeah. Well, then as Jen had testified, it is important to know what the developer community, what messaging the developer community has been hearing from the state on the ARPA funds. And VHCB, I think, has worked very hard to make public and have a bunch of public hearings and discussion points along the way about what their policies for funding, for using ARPA funds is. And they have rules and regs and guidelines already set up, and the developers and builders have all been building their next 3 years of pipeline based on what they've heard from VHCB. So if the legislature were to make a change, especially one that may not fully pass and go into effect until July 1, I really think that might have the opposite effect on what you're aiming to do, which is encourage more funding and housing development and all. And especially some of the builders who, are either deciding between, do I throw in some affordable units into what I was already preparing or not? I mean, this may throw a wet blanket on some of that and may cool the development of ARPA projects more than it stimulates it.
Okay. So I think I have a quick question. Is there ample housing available that's market-based, market rate pricing?
I would say no. I mean, we call it a housing crisis, but.
Right. So even when we're not providing, when it's entirely, so what's the barrier there? If you can charge whatever you want for the house you build, what's holding back the construction of units there, especially since we're seeing people spending higher sums than we've ever seen before for housing?
That we don't have that many rich people to demand that housing. So to build the home, it's going to cost such a high price point that there's a small segment of the Vermont market that can afford that. And so, yes, maybe those folks are being served. But the median income Vermonter, there's no home building happening there because they cannot build the homes and sell them to be affordable at the price point that median income Vermonter can afford. So the building isn't happening for those starter homes, because to build those homes, it costs upwards of $400,000. And that's not what a household earning 80 grand a year can afford.
Right, sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be asking it like a silly question. I'm just like trying to, my sense is that because we came into this from a request to waive Act 250 reviews And that was the nexus to our committee. And so we are somewhat belatedly learning about, we learn some every year, but we're somewhat belatedly learning in terms of the development of this bill, just how complicated the funding stream is. And although it might be attractive for us to be saying, if we're trading yet again Act 250 review for some kind of development, let's try to strike a better deal. I'm not sure that the current environment really allows us to negotiate in the way that we might hope to negotiate a quote unquote better deal for low and middle income Vermonters.
I mean, one thing that drives affordability is predictability. And that's why you will hear builders worry about the permitting process, because they worry about the lack of predictability that they have entering into that process. And many builders I hear from all are very clear that predictability saves money. If they knew how long something was going to take and what it was going to require for them to get the permit or build the housing, just knowing it, they can plan for it, they can schedule their crews, they can build it into their costs, and predictability makes housing more affordable. And so the more we can keep the development process predictable, the better. And right now that means that folks know about what PHPs are. They know what qualifies. There's case law to support them. There's a lot. They've been around for a long time, and they are a known quantity. And to create a new designated zone area or create a new a tweak, an update to PHPs, to define affordable housing in new ways and all that, I worry about how that's going to play out.
Sure. It would seem like an unwelcome complexity at a time where we're trying to move good projects, forward in a timely way. So I get that. The back to the component of, we were sort of on just PHPs pre-ARPA, that we were kind of getting what we were paying for, So is there any, I know that when VHCB does these projects, so Ms. Holler was talking about, they're actually perpetually affordable. So we could say, okay, in that instance, it is succeeding, it's more like what the committee is aiming for. Is there any way to help, and maybe it's outside this committee, for more projects to have the kind of affordability parameters that VHCB offers than just 20% of the units being rent controlled for 15 years?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I can appreciate that the legislature, this committee, and many others hears every year from VHCB because they report on what the state investments have been. But I also think it's important to know that VHCB is not the only affordable housing funding that requires perpetual affordability.
Yeah.
So VHFA, for instance, gives upwards over $30 million a year in federal tax credit equity. And we require perpetual affordability for that. So it's not just VHCB, and that's not the only way we get perpetual affordability. It's just VHFA doesn't come to the legislature and report on what we're doing with federal tax credits to you every year, because the legislature doesn't have a role in allocating federal tax credits the way you all have such a critical role in funding, using state funds to support affordable housing.
Sure.
So it also is important to know that when I say it takes 6, 7, 8 sources of money to layer together to build affordable housing, it means all the rules of all those programs all apply to the apartments that they're serving. So it's not a either or, it's a and in addition to. So if there was just ARPA funding, then the project would only have to adhere to that thick book that Jen held up of the, I forget, it's 800 pages of Treasury rules or something about fiscal recovery funds. But in addition, they have to adhere to VHCB's statute and what the legislature has layered on for what it wants to see for its ARPA funding. And in addition, if it needs tax credits, which many of the projects do, it has to adhere to the however many pages of rules we have through the IRS and that VHFA has set in place. And if it also needs HUD money, it has to follow all those rules. So I hear that you want more housing that's perpetually affordable and reaches deeper incomes for longer periods of time. And the way to do that is to put more money into VHCB so that there's more of that happening. But regulatory relief alone is not going to reach that level of investment. So when we talk about what it takes to build an apartment, there's often over $300,000 of public funds going for one apartment. So a sliver that's going to be VHCB, a sliver that's going to be ARPA, a sliver that's going to be tax credits, sliver that's going to be home or HUD money and all this. But it's $300,000 is subsidizing that apartment. Whereas regulatory relief, and these are very dated numbers, but was $33,000 per project. That's not even per apartment. Right. So it's just really important to remember that if you want the kind of perpetual affordability and great developments that the state funds and supports, it needs to do that through state funding. And it's probably not going to get there through regulatory relief alone. Regulatory relief, I mean, Act 250 in large part works, and it doesn't add hundreds of thousands of dollars per apartment to what's being created. If it did, Act 250 would be very broken.
Yeah. No, you disabused us of the notion that we were saving people a lot of money with, the amount of money that an Act 250 exemption translates into is very modest. And so we've been trying to figure out other ways to bring more money to the table, and therefore to look for higher levels of affordability for longer periods of time. And my personal conclusion is that however well-intentioned we are at the moment, we're in an awkward position because there's a very complicated sort of what I'll just call it industry out there, a collection of people working on the issue. And I don't know that we are bringing forward a welcome proposal at this point. Senator McDonald.
Your witness started out with, we don't have enough rich people to build houses for. And that's true. But the question would be, so who are the rich people that are buying all the houses for a lot of money? And who are the rich people who our builders do build for? They're not, the answer appears to be, they're not the folks that live here, which is fine. But what do we ask those people to contribute to help subsidize the houses that the workers live in and the restaurant employees that serve them live in, and that operate the tourist attractions that those people enjoy? And we don't have enough people we don't have enough rich Vermonters to buy the very expensive houses that our builders choose to build rather than the houses for low and moderate income people. There's, why do we not? I think the witness said we have to come up with state funds if we want these houses. And if we have to come up with state funds, where do we find them?
If I were the witness, I would ask us that question.
Well, we also, the witness is correct when the witness says that if you want something, you have to have affordability and predictability. And if you want to get rich, you got to have affordability and predictability. You want to be guaranteed no minimum wage increases. You don't want any marginal tax rates. You don't want to permit any labor organizations. Those are all predictability that you seek. And when we cater to that predictability, we get we get the problem we're trying to solve. And then we instead of moving forwards, we fall backwards. We're in retreat. We're in retreat, and we ask ourselves for a path forward. You can't have a path forward when you're in retreat.
There was just, I can't remember where I saw it, a article in the last 24 hours about a builder down in Brandon, I think it was Naylor and Breen, and they were trying to build, they wanted to do a project to build housing for their own employees, so worker housing, and they couldn't figure out a way to do it. And I would love to learn more about what they saw the obstacles. The quotes I saw in the piece, frankly, cited Act 250 repeatedly, which surprised me given how little we've seen Act 250 delay a project when we looked at data for projects, and how little, how modest the cost of that relief. When we do relieve you from Act 250, it only contributes $33,000 to a multi-million-dollar development. It's a very modest, it's meaningful money, but it's still a very modest amount compared to the total project cost. So I keep seeing this disconnect. And with that, so any committee questions for Ms. Collins or Ms. Holler? Or we did receive testimony from Mr. Weiss this morning, who's, I think it is 1 minute till noon, and Senator Westman has a committee of conference to leave for. So thanks for giving us a wave and letting me know, Senator Westman. He needs to move on, and we need to adjourn. So thank you, all witnesses. It's not a very satisfying place to leave it. I feel like we've explored something that's all well-intentioned, but I'm not sure we're able to get there from here with the package we currently have. So we will see you all tomorrow, and keep on learning. I'm going to do some homework between now